Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll get started in about a minute. Hi, Tom. How's the weather in Toronto? Nice. Still humid? Okay. I think that's coming our way tomorrow. Hi, Mavis.
Hey, Mavis.
All right, so it's on the hour, and I like to get started. We have a lot of material to cover today. I'm very pleased to welcome Stefan de Hauke. Oh, I butchered your name.
That's okay.
Stefan Deheko, who's going to be facilitating today's webinar on getting race ready and dealing with the heat. And I know in Ontario, especially, and probably in Quebec too, the heat has been an issue for these last few weeks. So being able to get outside and to exercise may have been an issue. So hopefully you'll learn something today from Stefan's presentation to be able to help you to deal with exercising in the heat. So today's presentation is going to last approximately 1 hour. Hi, Melissa. And we will, please, if you've got questions or comments, put them in the chat box. We'll be using that today to correspond with. And if you've got anything, write it in and we'll be watching it, and we'll try to answer it as much as possible. So if you've missed a session from our series, here are a list of the sessions with the applicable recordings. So they're listed here if you want to take a picture of this, or else you can find the list of recordings on the CAF Connection site. So before we get started, this is a standard slide that we present every single time. So just to let you know that the presentation we're about to view is the intellectual property of the Department of National Defense. So any reproduction or retransmission of the slides contained in this presentation is strictly forbidden. Some of the topics discussed in this webinar may be of a sensitive nature, and I'm not so sure whether they're sensitive, but just probably not so appropriate for young children. So we ask for some parental discretion when listening to this, if you've got children around you, that some of the information is not necessarily appropriate for them. So please understand that any stories that somebody wishes to share are theirs alone to share, and that anything said by the participants in this webinar through the chat box is not to be discussed outside of this webinar. So we're invoking the Vegas rule. This webinar is also being recorded for viewing later on CAF Connection and eventually on the PSP YouTube channel. So although we want our active participation from everybody, if you're more comfortable with just sitting there and listening, following along, that is fine as well. One thing to note, that in the recordings, what happens in the chat box, unless we discuss it out loud, is not recorded. So if that helps at all. Okay, so we're going to go to our first poll before I hand over everything to Steph. So again, what is your affiliation with the CAF community? All right, so we have a good mix of people, some serving members, some D&D and CFMWS employees, a couple family members, a veteran, and one other person. So that's great. It's nice to see a good variety of people here. All right, so I'm going to hand this over now to Steph. I'm going to turn off my mic and my video. And after I switch this to the next slide, Steph, take her away.
Okay, sounds good, Diane. So welcome, everybody. My name's Stefan. I'm a fitness instructor from 17 Wing, Winnipeg. And today we're going to talk about exercising in the heat, kind of what you have to look out for, prevention strategies, talk a little bit about hydration towards the end, and kind of echoing what Diane said, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat at any time, really. If anything comes to mind or you want to discuss anything or anything you've been wondering, just feel free to write that in the chat and we'll talk about it. So I'm going to disable my camera here just so that you guys get the full presentation on your screen, because the camera takes up a little bit of it. So I will disable that and then we're going to go through it here. So again, any questions along the way, just feel free to ask. Okay, so we're going to start off just with a few definitions here, some of the main points that I wanted to cover. So heat-related illnesses, that's going to be a big thing to look out for when you're exercising outside in the extreme heat. So heat-related illnesses, just very, very simply what they are, they're just syndromes resulting from your body's thermal regulation or lack of thermal regulation when exposed to high heat environments. So what that means is basically your body has natural mechanisms in place to help cool itself when it's exercising or when it's in the heat. And because of that intense heat, the body can be prevented from operating properly. And that's when we can get into some of these issues here. So kind of most commonly, the issues that you would see would be either heat edema or heat cramps. Heat cramps more specifically for those running, I would think. And the way that you can kind of tell if you are getting heat cramps, it'll be painful spasms in the muscles following exercise in moderate temperatures. Usually they're found within the calf muscles or abdominal muscles. So for those of you that have done running in the heat for extended periods of time, would probably have experienced this at one point or another. So that's probably going to be the most common sign and symptom you would see. And everything after that is just going to be a progression. So that's the thing with heat-related illnesses. They start with easier to manage symptoms, and as you remain in the heat, those symptoms then can worsen and intensify, and they can progress. So that's going to be what we're going to talk about going forward, is kind of the progression of these heat-related illnesses. So following heat cramps, you would most likely then be exposed to heat exhaustion. So that's just a form of shock, and it results from strenuous work or exercise in a hot environment for a prolonged period of time. And then following heat exhaustion is heat stroke. So a lot of times I think people get confused about heat exhaustion and heat stroke. So heat exhaustion is the precursor to heat stroke. Heat stroke is a life-threatening condition, and it can actually be fatal. So that would be kind of a worst case scenario, is heat stroke. And hopefully kind of the stuff we talk about today, we can prevent heat stroke or someone getting to that point. So I'm going to move on to the next slide here. So why is monitoring heat-related illnesses important? So again, we kind of already briefly went over this, but a lot of these negative effects can and will decrease performance. And in the case of heat stroke, they could even lead to death. So that's, again, a worst case scenario. But with proper prevention strategies and planning, you can reduce the effects of any heat-related illnesses or actually prevent them entirely. So the heat-related illnesses, most commonly, you're going to be dealing with that between May and September, depending on your region. So I know here kind of in the prairies, the last, month and a half, we've had a lot of really hot days. I was even talking to one of my coworkers who's an avid runner and was running outside all through COVID. And, come June, he basically stopped his running regimen just because it was too hot for him outside. So hopefully that's going to be something we can cover and kind of help you guys to work through. A lot of it can be, like I said, prevented with proper planning and common sense. So those are some of the things we're going to talk about. So again, starting with heat cramps, they will develop fairly rapidly when you're exposed to the moderate temperatures outside. Like I mentioned, you're probably going to feel them more in the calves or abdominal muscles because of the impact from running. Heat cramps are just simply caused by dehydration and a lack of salt through the increased amount of sweating that is going to be taking place. So once you've felt these effects of heat cramps, the best course of action would be to, remove yourself from the heat, try to rehydrate, replenish some of those fluids and electrolytes. And once the cramping has ceased, then it's usually okay to continue on. So we're going to take a closer look at some of the signs and symptoms here of heat cramps. So signs and symptoms, like I said, pain and spasms in the muscles, again, more likely in the calves for running. Cool and clammy skin, so you're going to be sweating quite a bit, so it should be wet to the touch. You might have some fatigue or dizziness, maybe some headaches. Some of those symptoms would be kind of leading more into heat exhaustion, but they might be present there for the heat cramps. And we already kind of covered the treatment here, so just simply removing yourself from that hot environment, making sure to drink cold water or sports drink to replenish the electrolytes and fluids, and actively stretching any of those cramped or affected muscles, and usually giving it some time, and that should be enough to help you continue on there. So can you get heat cramps while biking? So sure you can. Like I said, as far as the cause of heat cramps, it's just being exposed to that heat for a long period of time, and your body sweating out a lot of its electrolytes and salts. And if you aren't actively replenishing your salt and hydration, that's when you can experience heat cramps. So really, it's any form of exercise, whether you're running, jogging, biking, if you're doing, maybe like a body weight circuit or something outside for long enough, or if you're shoveling or, yard work, anything that you're doing physical for an extended period of time, and, maybe not keeping an eye on the hydration, that's when you can experience the heat cramps. So moving on, heat exhaustion. So heat exhaustion, like I said, it occurs when the body's temperature rises and the thermoregulation response is activated in order to compensate. So I briefly touched upon this. Your body will start sweating, and that's one of the mechanisms that the body uses to cool itself. So the body will sweat, and then the sweat will evaporate from the skin, and that will cool you off. The problem is when it's too hot outside, the sweat has a harder time evaporating off of your skin, and it prevents the body from cooling itself naturally. So heat exhaustion is an early sign that the body's regulation mechanisms are becoming overwhelmed. And if it's not addressed, this is how we can get into some more serious conditions such as heat stroke. I put here, heat exhaustion is not always preceded by heat cramps. So it doesn't necessarily follow that order of heat cramps, heat exhaustion, heat stroke. Again, it kind of depends on what activity you're doing. You could just be outside for a long period of time and experience heat exhaustion without doing any, moderate to intense exercise. So fluid loss due to the sweating will increase the blood flow to the skin. So increased blood flow to the skin will result in decreased blood flow to the vital organs. So this is kind of the main reason why heat exhaustion is a more serious condition. By getting the decreased blood to your vital organs can result in loss of consciousness or shock. And from there, it would just get worse and worse. And then eventually organ systems would start shutting down, and that's when it can be life-threatening. So the idea is to prevent this before it happens. So just going over some of the signs and symptoms here of heat exhaustion. So nausea, headache, dizziness. You're going to be feeling a lot more cool and clammy, so profuse sweating. Your skin is going to turn pale. You might start to get confused or disoriented. Your breathing rate will be affected, so shallow, rapid respiration. These are all telltale signs of heat exhaustion. So it is pretty obvious when somebody is experiencing heat exhaustion. And again, with the treatment here, very similar to the heat cramps, just it's more important to act on this treatment. So removal from the hot environment immediately, drinking lots of cold water or sports drinks. I put in brackets there if they're alert. Sometimes they're too out of it, and it might not be a good idea to get them to drink something. Could be a choking hazard, or they might just vomit it up. But just to be aware of that. And then treating for shock. So trying to calm the person down if they are experiencing any of those shock symptoms, maybe getting them in the recovery position, anything like that. The main thing, though, is just removal from that environment and trying to cool the body down. Okay, so heat stroke. So this is the one nobody wants to experience. So it is rare because you do need to be exposed to that extreme heat for a long period of time, and without doing any sort of prevention. So, being outside for multiple hours, sweating the entire time, not really rehydrating, not taking breaks. So all of these things are going to contribute to the heat stroke. So again, prevention is going to be key here, and just taking those breaks, making sure to hydrate. But essentially, heat stroke occurs when the body's cooling systems fail. So, you've been sweating and sweating, and your body just can't cool itself, and eventually it's too much, and the system starts shutting down. So this is where it becomes a life and death situation, when the body systems and organ systems start to shut down. I wrote here, often this has occurred when the signs and symptoms of heat exhaustion are ignored. So you will experience the symptoms of heat exhaustion before you get to the point of heat stroke. The important thing is, though, again, is acting on those symptoms and treating the heat exhaustion before it becomes heat stroke. Actually, with heat stroke, sweating will stop. So the body's fluid levels are so severely low that it can't actually produce any more sweat. So if you ever get to a point where your body is unable to sweat, that is very serious, and that's when loss of consciousness can occur, seizures, coma, or even death. So these symptoms must be recognized, and you must have immediate care and treatment. So again, just covering a few of those signs and symptoms. So fever, hot and dry skin, flushed face, nausea, vomiting, very rapid pulse, and then the decreased level of consciousness, seizures, comas, all those sort of things will be pretty evident when somebody is experiencing heat stroke. And again, the immediate removal from the hot environment is number one. Aggressive cooling. So basically, you're trying to get that body temperature cooled off as quickly and as effectively as you can. So I put here sort of a progression on the steps you can take to rapidly cool somebody if they're experiencing heat stroke. So immersing the body in cool water. So if there's any way that you can get the majority of the person's body into a tub or a bath, anything with cold water that they can submerge most of their body, that would be ideal. If that's not possible, submerging the forearms or some of the legs into water, or then pouring water over the torso and fanning the skin afterwards. So those are kind of the progressions on how you can go about rapidly cooling down somebody who may be affected by heat stroke. And then contact EMS if required. So again, this could be a potentially life-threatening condition. So if you feel like you're with somebody that may be experiencing this, EMS might be required, and it probably would be a good idea just to err on the side of caution. So prevention and recommendations. So like I mentioned already, most of these heat-related illnesses can be avoided or minimized. So key strategies to preventing this would be acclimatization, having adequate hydration, make sure you're wearing appropriate clothing, so more loose fitting, light colored. You know, you don't want to be wearing lots of dark colors in the sun because that's just going to make sure it's going to attract the heat more. And making sure to avoid any activities during extreme heat temperatures. So if you are planning on going for a run or continue with your training, you know, just think about it critically and plan around the weather. You should probably try to train in the earlier morning or later in the evening when the sun and the heat is not as intense. And avoidance, if avoidance is not possible, do have those frequent water breaks, schedule rest and recovery cycles, and you know, always be monitoring what state your body's in. So if you notice that you know you're really sweating and you can't seem to stop sweating, that might be a sign that you're going towards the route of heat exhaustion, maybe even heat stroke. So you know, make sure to get those breaks and hydrate and just be smart about it. So we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit here. So this is something that I wanted to cover that I just learned about myself recently. So it's the wet bulb globe temperature. So I got little pictures there at the top. They're devices that are used to measure the temperature relative with humidity, wind, and solar radiation. So there are guidelines with regards to the wet bulb globe temperature that will indicate what level of activity you should be permitted to do depending on the readings. So if it's very hot and humid, it'll give you a better idea of the type of activity levels that you should be doing, what sort of rest and work breaks that you should be looking for, how much hydration you should be trying to get. So all of these things can be used to help better plan what type of exercise you're going to be doing for the day and how to most effectively and safely exercise when the heat and humidity is very high. So a couple other points here I put here. Like I said, exercising in the heat will cause you to sweat, and that evaporation of the sweat is what helps cool your body. So when there is a lot of humidity present, it's going to inhibit your body's ability to do that. And that's why we have to pay closer attention to humidity and not just, you know, whatever temperature reading that you see outside. I've got a little chart here, and it does a good job of showing you kind of what the outside temperature is, and then when you factor in humidity, what the temperature would feel like when you combine those two things here. So you can see at the top there, we've got kind of temperatures ranging from 20 all the way up to like 50 degrees Celsius. On the left-hand side, we've got relative humidity percentages. So if you take a day, you know, today it's maybe 30 degrees out. And if it's 10% humidity, that's very low for the summer. But, you know, you can see here, it would be about 23 degrees. Or if you look a more extreme case, if we have 30 degrees as our temperature outside, and then we go down and we have, you know, 80% humidity, that makes it feel more like 32.5. So you can see the correlation between outdoor temperature and relative humidity. So the higher the relative humidity, the more it's going to increase the temperature outdoors. So you can see even here, it's kind of color coded, kind of giving you an idea of as those temperatures increase. Yeah, like Diane said, we could make this available to you. This is just something I was able to Google and find this chart, but it is kind of a handy thing to quickly look up and see sort of what the temperature is. If your phone can tell you what the humidity level is, you'd get a better idea of what you're going to be experiencing. So obviously, kind of anything here in the black is going to be more extreme, and that's when you're going to have to really plan out what your workout is going to be and take appropriate measures. If it's in the white or the green, you know, you might experience some of that heat, but just to a lesser extent, and you'll have more time to work without having to take frequent breaks. So this is just kind of, again, indicating those colors that I mentioned here. So anything in the white is kind of sub 25 degrees Celsius. So work to rest cycle, you can work for about 60 minutes with a 15-minute rest period. Water intake, about 300 mLs. So that's just kind of moderate work. So if you are going for, you know, a more casual jog or something that's, you know, light yard work, that sort of thing, that's kind of what you can expect. When that translates to hard work, so if you're, you know, really running hard, or you're doing any kind of circuit or heavy yard work, anything like that, you can see it cuts down the work and it increases the rest. So that's going to be kind of the theme, is as it gets hotter, as it gets more humid, you're basically going to decrease the amount of work, increase the amount of rest, and then hydrate more appropriately as it gets hotter. So if we look here into the red even, you know, that's when it's going to be above like 31 degrees Celsius. You're at like a 30-30 split here for moderate work. So working for 30 minutes, resting for 30 minutes, and then drinking up to, you know, a liter of water. It says exercise is forbidden, very high risk for heat casualties. This diagram I pulled, it was from a college level football training, like NCAA football training, and just kind of guidelines that they could follow. So, you know, that would be very intense exercise, and that's probably why they wrote forbidden here. And even in the black, like exercise is forbidden. You know, that's only 31.7. So that's not to say you can't do any exercise when the temperature is above, you know, 31 or 32 degrees. Again, it's just making sure you're getting appropriate work to rest ratios and you're hydrating appropriately. That's going to be the main takeaway from this one here. And yeah, I saw Diane there mentioned, wrote here with the wing. So our base 17 wing, they do use the wet bulb. And that's how they give our heat advisory warnings. So a lot of the times on the D1, we'll get emails with heat advisory for the day. And, you know, if people are on the flight line and that sort of stuff and they're working outdoors, they give them these recommendations and these standards that they have to follow. And they must, you know, have these appropriate rest breaks and hydration levels. So it is something that is used, and it's a good resource. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is heat acclimatization. So this is something that I think is more practical and something that you guys can actually apply to your training. So heat acclimatization is basically the body's way of adapting to a specific environment. So the premise behind it is the more that your body is exposed to, you know, a high heat environment while training, so running, doing any kind of fitness really, it will actually improve its ability to cool itself and increase performance as it's exposed to those elements. So the adaptations can occur anywhere from like 1 to 2 weeks. So 7 to 14 days is a pretty conservative amount of time to acclimatize the body to those high heat environments. The adaptations will be beneficial to your exercise and training, and it'll just have a better way for your body to handle that heat stress. So I just have a couple sources here. So they were able to see improvements in submaximal exercise performance, increased VO2, and just overall comfort while training in the heat. So it has been proven to improve performance and kind of reduce the effects of the heat while acclimatization occurs. So the benefits of the acclimatization, it helps your body to sweat more appropriately, and as well as to have that sweat evaporate more readily, having better, like I said, VO2 max and cardiovascular ability, as well as just thermal tolerance. So just how your body feels while it's in the heat, being able to just manage that better. So these are, again, some of the positive adaptations that can occur. And with proper acclimatization, you can experience reductions in your heart rate, internal body temperature, skin temperature, the electrolyte concentrations found in your sweat, and your rating of perceived exertion. So all of those things are important when you're running, exercising, if you're trying to improve your times. All of that's going to be beneficial to you in the long run. And as well as you're going to increase your performance, blood flow, and the thermal regulation, like I had mentioned. So that is one of the strategies you can adopt is if you know you're having a race or a competition coming up, and it's more than likely going to be at a time of the year when you know the environment is going to be hot or above normal temperatures, you can start to train for that and give yourself, you know, up to 2 weeks of acclimatization, and you will see performance increases. So this is just a little infographic here, kind of giving you some information on what to expect as your body acclimatizes. So at the top there, we've got the initial responses to heat. So if you were to start today and it's 30 plus degrees outside and you wanted to go for a run and start training, these are the things that you would probably experience. So you would have impaired aerobic performance. So you won't be able to run as efficiently or exercise as efficiently. Obviously, you're going to be sweating a lot more. Skin temperature is going to be increased. Core temperature is going to be increased. You might start to feel some of those signs and symptoms of heat exhaustion, dizziness, confusion, and obviously experiencing some dehydration. Now, as you acclimatize and you continue to train in those conditions, you'll see significant improvements to your aerobic performance. You're going to have a greater increase in the skin blood flow and how your body is handling its sweat. The core temperature is not going to get as hot, and you're going to feel cooler than you did. Decreased heart rate and improved cardiac output. All these sort of things are going to be beneficial to your running program or just in general exercise. And it can take as little as 2 weeks to start to feel these effects. So I've got here adaptions developing in the first week of heat exposure, and 10 to 14 days are being optimal for complete or near complete acclimatization. So if this is something is you are going to be training for, that's what you can expect, is to be acclimatized by that 2-week marker. Now, the rate of decay for any sort of benefits that you've developed over this time, so the lowered heart rate, the lower core temperature, is estimated at about 2.5% per day without heat exposure. So if you've trained for this and you've got your competition coming up, you're acclimatized to the conditions, you're acclimatized to the heat, and then you do your competition or your race, and then after that you decided you're going to take a break, you would expect to lose about 2.5% of that, of whatever benefits you've gained each day. So it does decay rather quickly. So it is something that if you are, if you have an event coming up in 2 months, you can slowly start acclimatizing yourself and try to maybe peak your acclimatization when you're about, a week or so, maybe 10 days out from competition. Otherwise, you're going to start to decay those benefits. And if the competition is further out, that just means you're going to have to train in the high heat environments for a longer period of time. So I said here, it is recommended to compete in acclimatization as close as possible to the competition. So that's when you can just kind of have a look at any sort of planning that you're doing for your competition. Have a look at the calendar and see, how far out you are, when you want to peak your performance by. It's very common in any sort of organized training program. Okay, so here are some tips for how you can go about acclimatizing yourself to the heat. Obviously, proper hydration before, during, after any sort of practice or training. That should be pretty common sense at this point. If you're properly hydrated, you're going to reduce the risks of any sort of heat-related illnesses that we talked about, and it's just going to improve your performance overall. So gradually increasing the intensity of your practice or training over the course of a few days. So, if you're in a controlled environment, if you're indoors or on a treadmill, or, running in the fall, and you have a set pace that you're running at, I wouldn't expect to be able to just take your race pace or your competition pace right out of the gate. I would definitely scale that back, make sure that you're taking it a little bit slower as you acclimatize, because the effects of the heat will hinder your performance. So you do want to make sure you're gradually increasing the intensity and duration of your training as you start to acclimatize. Increase the amount of sodium in your diet. So again, you will have that increased sweat production when it's very high heat, and you'll be sweating in excess. So making sure to replace any lost sodium and salt in your diet. That's kind of going hand in hand with the hydration. Making sure you're just keeping yourself cool and comfortable in training. So either taking any frequent breaks and having water on hand, ice or wet towels, just any way that you can keep yourself cooler and more comfortable. That'll help you train for a longer period of time. And then I think this is often ignored in any type of training, but just the importance of sleep. So people often don't really think too much about sleep and don't prioritize it enough, but getting adequate sleep, especially when you're training for competition, is very important. So putting more of an emphasis on sleep and getting a proper night's sleep before the training will be beneficial. And even, Diane mentioned here picking a shadier route. So that kind of goes back into, maybe training not, right in the middle of the afternoon when the sun and the heat is going to be the most intense. Maybe, go for a run later in the morning, or in the evening when the sun has settled down a little bit more. So there's always different strategies you can take. But in the case of acclimatization, you are trying to expose yourself to these high heat environments and build that resilience that'll help you perform better in the heat as you go forward. So this is just like a little infographic I have here. So I think anything that's got some information and some pictures and is just easy to digest is helpful. So this was something that I found, and we're gonna share this into the chat here. So if you want, you can go ahead and download it. It's just like a simple JPEG, and it's got some good information on it, and it kind of ties everything together that I've talked about, and it just gives you some good quick information that you can refer to about acclimatization before your competition. Okay. So we're going to move on here. So that's kind of everything I wanted to talk about with regards to, heat stress, heat-related illnesses, acclimatization, and we're going to kind of change gears and talk a little more about hydration. So I understand that we have covered hydration before in the past. So some of these slides I might breeze through, but it is important, and it kind of goes hand in hand with exercising out in the heat. So just some kind of definitions here to get started. So dehydration is a physiological state characterized by a negative fluid balance or electrical light imbalance. So just means your body is lacking fluid or lacking electrolytes or both, and there are adverse effects to when that happens. Electrolytes simply are vitamins or minerals whose function is to help regulate fluid balance within the body. Those are just kind of the most two important terms that I wanted to go through here, because we will be talking about those more. So moving on, why is monitoring hydration levels important? So very similar to why it was important to monitor, heat-related illnesses. It can affect your performance negatively if not monitored or not acted upon. And in some cases, it can even lead to death as well. So those are obviously the severe cases, but in the case of running for performance, it'll definitely negatively impact your performance. So water is the largest component of the human body, ranging to about 45 to 70% of the body is made up of water. And if one does not replenish fluids appropriately, the temperature will rise. So again, that's just going back to your prevention about heat exhaustion, heat stroke, heat cramps. Make sure to stay hydrated. So fluid loss can be tracked by sweat loss. This can be tracked by changes in body weight. So these are kind of more extreme ways to measure fluid loss. Again, a lot of it should just be common sense. If you're out in the heat and you're doing a moderate form of exercise, you're going to be sweating. If you're sweating for a long period of time, you're going to be losing fluid, and your body is going to be wanting you to replenish that fluid. So it's kind of whatever you sweat out needs to be replenished through water intake. Here we have some numbers, and these kind of actually surprised me. So it says fluid loss of 1% of the total body weight can be associated with elevation in core temperature during exercise. So 1% of your total body weight through sweat isn't actually that much. And you can see here it already leads to some adverse effects. And then fluid loss of 3 to 5% body weight results in cardiovascular strain and the impaired ability to dissipate heat. So even just as little as 5% of your body weight lost through sweat can drastically hinder your performance. And then even at like 7%, you can lose consciousness and collapse. So that's already like talking about heat stroke and experiencing those symptoms at only 7% loss of fluid. So it really doesn't take much to get to that point when you look at the numbers. And then I just put here, it is common for athletes to have a fluid loss of 2 to 6% body weight during intense practice and exercise in the heat. So, it can be common for those to almost ride that line of, having heat stroke-like symptoms and losing consciousness to with their fluid loss. So that is something that just needs to be monitored pretty consistently. So just again, kind of going into the numbers a little bit deeper. So if you had a 100-kilogram athlete, 5% of his body weight loss would be 11 pounds. So I'm sure many of you have heard people, doing hot yoga or things like that, where they can sweat like a ton of weight out in an hour-long class, and they can lose 5-10 pounds. So this just kind of gives you a better idea of how fast you can actually lose your water weight just through sweat and through the heat. And it's even increased when you add moderate to vigorous exercise. So it is something that has to be closely monitored, and it is important to have those hydration breaks and rest as needed. Again, here's another one of those little infographics that I really liked. So I will also make this one available for you. But it's very simple, and I find it kind of gives you some good information here. I especially liked the little indicator of the urine color chart. So that's something that is very easy for people to kind of just assess in their own daily life. It doesn't even have to be related to training or being outside in the heat. Just the color of urine can just give you a very clear indication on what your hydration level is. So if you wake up first thing in the morning and you use the washroom and you see that you're maybe on the darker end of that scale, that's probably indicating that, okay, I should probably have some water and not go for the first first double of the day, just to make sure that you're getting that sufficient hydration. And it just gives you some other good little facts here. So I thought that was kind of a nice little indicator. So now we're going to talk about electrolytes. So again, we talked about electrolytes briefly. They're just minerals that help with your body's fluid regulation. So they will function with your muscle contractions and nerve conductions. Electrolytes will be depleted as you start to sweat. So it's not a rapid thing, but it does deplete over time. And obviously, the more you're sweating and the longer you're exposed to a hot environment, the more you're going to be losing those electrolytes, and the more important it will be to replace them. So the majority of electrolytes that are lost through sweat are sodium chloride and potassium. So that's why we mentioned earlier about having more salt in your diet to just kind of increase the amount of salt and electrolytes in your system to help counteract the excess loss of electrolytes and the excess sweating that's going to be experienced when you're in those high heat environments. So athletes that sweat profusely for multiple days in a row are not climatized to the heat, or who have low sodium intake can experience heat cramps. So that again is another kind of preventative thing we talked about. Heat cramps are probably the most common side effect that you guys will experience in your training outdoors. So just again, making sure you have that proper hydration and proper sodium in your diet. So here are just some of the performance benefits. So increasing your blood volume, increasing oxygen and nutrients delivered to the cells. So the more blood volume you have, the more readily you can deliver oxygen into the working muscles and organs that are going to be working harder in the heat as you're exercising. That'll help to improve your stamina, your endurance, cardiac output, and it'll just even help with water retention. So that's when you can experience those muscle cramps, when you have a lack of water and salt in your system. If you have more salt, water is going to be attracted to the salt, and it's going to keep you hydrated for longer. So here are just a little bit of numbers to go off of. So 7 to 11 grams per day with less than 6.6 grams or more than 12 grams being associated with increased all-cause mortality rates. Okay, so again, electrolytes continued. So potassium loss in sweat can generally be replaced through the diet. So 2 to 6 grams per day. Potassium intake of the average North American is 2 to 4 grams per day. So just kind of through the average diet of the average person, you should be able to replace any potassium that you've lost through the excess sweating and the high heat. There are some potassium-rich foods that you can increase in your diet if you are looking to get more potassium. So citrus-based fruits and juices, melons, strawberries, tomatoes, bananas, all of those will have potassium in them. So those are some good things to incorporate in your diet, especially if you're going to be doing a lot of training in the high heat. So here are some contraindications to increasing electrolytes. So if you do have higher levels of electrolytes in your system, you could be at risk for hypertension. So that's higher resting blood pressure, arteriosclerosis. So that's the thickening of the arterial walls. So again, that's not good. If you do have a family history of heart disease. So again, these are just kind of general guidelines here. You don't want an excess of electrolytes in your system, but it is important to replace them if you are exercising in the heat frequently. And you can consult your physician prior to making any changes in your diet, and I would recommend that if that's something you are thinking about or looking at. Okay, so monitoring hydration status. So like I had kind of already mentioned, measuring body weight before and after training is an effective way to measure your hydration levels. That is one way to do it. We also talked about in the infographic there through urine. The color of your urine is another way that you can monitor your hydration status. And it just gives you a better idea of if you're experiencing that dehydration or not. And it's something that you can monitor kind of on a daily basis as you're going through your training, or even if you are, doing a 2-week kind of acclimatization period. That would be a perfect time to have a closer look at your hydration levels, and just to make sure you are staying relatively hydrated from session to session, and you're not chronically dehydrated. Because if you are dehydrated, we've already talked about a lot of those performance decreases and other adverse effects that you can experience. So I just kind of already briefly touched on that. Again, looking at the urine is another way. So fluid replacement. So 3 main ways that you can get fluid into your system: before the activity, during the activity, and after the activity. So all 3 are important. So it says before activity, make sure to consume at least half a liter of fluid around 2 hours prior to the activity. So making sure that you're sufficiently hydrated before you actually start any activity. Make sure that you have enough time to actually digest the liquids that you're ingesting. Caffeine. So if you are planning on running first thing in the morning or earlier in the day, and if you have caffeine in your system, caffeine is a diuretic, and that can increase the urine production. No, shouldn't be an issue if you're a regular coffee drinker, but it might just promote you to expel some of that fluid, and just to make sure that you're not dehydrated before activity. So just some considerations. So during the activity, most palatable fluid is preferred. So water or sports drink are going to be kind of your go-to. Can't really say if one's better than the other. It's more personal preference. Sports drinks do have the benefit of having those electrolytes in them. So, if you're planning on exercising for an extended period of time, and the likelihood of you to have lost some of your electrolytes is high, then a sports drink would probably be more ideal than just plain water. But as long as you are properly hydrated going into your workout, and you are drinking either water or a sports drink throughout, you should be okay. And then, of course, after the activity is finished, making sure to drink at least another half a liter of water or a sports drink. If you were training in the very high heat where a lot of sweating has occurred, or rapid rehydration is required, that's when a sports drink would become more ideal. So again, if that's something you've been doing where you're training in the high heat for an extended period of time, and you need to rapidly rehydrate, a sports drink would be more ideal than the water. It's also important to consume protein during your physical or post-physical activity. So that's just kind of something else to consider with your diet, is just making sure you're getting enough protein. Like I said, adequate protein throughout the day to support growth and tissue maintenance. So especially if you're pairing your training with, or your running program with any sort of weight training, or anything like that, it is important to have adequate protein to promote muscle growth and recovery. That's going to be the key to maximizing any muscle growth and facilitate that recovery when you're sleeping. Carbohydrates as well. So making sure we've got a good balance of carbs and protein in the diet. Carbs are going to help to fuel your performance. So that's, again, something that's more a little different topic, but just something to keep in the back of your head is, if you want to really increase and maximize performance, having an appropriate diet is going to be very beneficial. So there's other resources for that. And this is just kind of a little fact here. If you want to make your own kind of electrolytes-based beverage, it's recommended that you mix 2 parts of a non-caffeinated soft drink with 1 part water, and then add 1/8 tablespoon of salt, and that will give you kind of like your homemade version of a sports drink, and it'll match the carbohydrate concentration of commercial sports drinks such as Gatorade or Powerade. So if you don't have a sports drink readily available and you're at home and you kind of have the other stuff here, then in a pinch you can kind of make your own if you were needing that. So just some references here where the information was gathered, and we've got my information here, so my contact information and Diane's contact information. That's kind of everything that I needed to go through. So I think Diane is going to hop back on here in a second, and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, thanks so much, Stefan. That was extremely interesting. I really like the bit about acclimatizing yourself to the weather and it requiring that 2 weeks in order to be able to be acclimatized to the heat and to be able to work out as appropriately as you want to. So thank you very much for that. So these are the standard resources that we talk about after every one of our webinars. So if you want any information, if you're struggling with anything at all, the Canadian Forces Members Assistance Program is there to help you 24/7, 365 days a year. Referral service for you or your family. As members of D&D employees as well, this is also the EAP number that you can contact. If you're concerned about yourself or a loved one who may be considering suicide, please contact the Canada Suicide Hotline and get support through them. For information on COVID-19, go to the federal government COVID coronavirus website. They have the most up-to-date information for everybody. Family information line is there for you, 1-800, 365 days of the year. Bilingual service that has actual counselors on the end of the line. So should you need any information about anything at all, please give them a call. The Sexual Misconduct Response Center is also there for you should you have any issues around sexual misconduct. Kids Help Phone's there for you and your family. So there's also a military family Kids Help Phone too that they can contact. So please, if anybody's struggling, use any one of these resources. The ARC line in support of COVID-19 is the Canadian military line for all things COVID-19. So if you're looking for that, please take a moment and contact them or look it up. So final poll. So just Ken, how do you feel about applying what you've learned today in your daily living? That's really, really good to see. Right, and this is a list of our upcoming sessions. So next week, we're going to be looking at tracking your progress and revising your goal if that's what you need to do. So please, if you can, join us for that one. Are there any questions or comments on what we've talked about today? Anything that you'd like to? Thanks very much, Tom. I'm glad it was a refresher and that you've learned something new. That's good to know as well. Dave, thank you very much. No problem, Lindsay. I'm glad you like the information. So if there are any questions or you have any comments, please let us know. Anything else you want to add, Stefan?
Not really. I mean, I know a lot of what I was saying can be seen as common sense, and I mean, a lot of it is. So, if there's any sort of takeaway from today, I would just say proper planning and just kind of looking ahead. A lot of this, the negative effects and conditions that can be experienced, you can prevent them or reverse them just through proper planning and staying hydrated, taking rest breaks. The acclimatization thing, I think, was the most relevant for people that are having a structured training program. So just kind of keeping that in the back of your head, that if you are having a competition coming up and you are going to be training in the heat, make sure to give yourself about that 2-week period to acclimatize and get your body ready for what it's going to be needing.
Yeah, that's really good. All right. Well, our hour is just up. So I want to thank again everybody for joining us today and for your participation. And again, thank you, Stefan, for the presentation. I really learned a lot through this, and I appreciate you being here and being able to deliver this for us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Anytime, Stefan, anytime.